Okay, David, welcome to our studios, our Magoni studios. So this is the first time on our set, and we're very pleased to have you.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Magnus.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now the so-called Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, has just ended in Beijing. And I noticed that almost every African leader went there. So what happened there? What did they bring back to Africa with them?
I think this FOCAC is happening at a very interesting time, and that's for a geopolitical reason and for a financial reason. The geopolitical reason is that, there might be a looming trade war, and China is looking to make friends elsewhere.
Sure.
On the financial bit, we have seen a sell-off in emerging markets, especially, and this concerns the countries that are exposed to dollar-denominated debt. So they're looking for money elsewhere in case, the Fed goes ahead with its program and rates really increase.
Yeah.
And that jeopardizes markets.
Yeah.
The dollar is strengthening. You can see what's happening in Turkey, in South Africa. Any sad news, means, bad things for the markets.
Yeah.
So the focus happened at a time where these two groups of people, and that's China on one hand, and the African countries, on the other hand, kind of need each other.
Yeah.
So that's South-to-South cooperation,
Yeah.
with President Xi saying, we should be looking at a shared future,
Yeah.
Came in that kind of atmosphere. And going by, what comes out of the announcements that were made by some of the leaders, like President Ramaphosa, who was outgoing chairman of the FOCAC, and he handed it over to the Senegalese president, and the speech by President Kagame, who is the current AU chairperson. They're kind of happy with some of the new things that have emerged from this FOCAC compared to what
like what? What are the new things?
In 2015. So there was a new commitment of $60 billion in matching what was announced in 2015 in Johannesburg. But over and above that, we have seen that in this FOCAC, there's been a commitment to import more from Africa to kind of reduce or narrow the trade deficit. And that would mean putting money in facilitating trade. That would mean putting money in industry. That would mean putting money in factories that add value.
Yeah.
And that would be good for Africa, but because China's funding of Africa has kind of been twofold, in the past 2 or 3 decades. The first was really resource driven, and the funding was, constructing railways, roads that really help China access resources. Yeah. We saw this in Tanzania very many years ago, building of the Tazara railway that comes from the port in Dar es Salaam to the copper mines in Zambia. And that was really their focus. This time with the Belden Road initiative, which you probably want to talk about, we have seen, more financing that is tied to such projects in the hinterland of Africa, and not just to the coastal countries or countries that have resources. And that I think is interesting.
Yeah, you mentioned shared prosperity. What are we sharing? Now, because the reason I say that is, if you look at Africa's trade with China, it accounts to, at best, 5% of their total trade. So they've got like 50-something% share with the other Asian countries. So whether are we really sharing? I mean, is that just something that you say so people would say that you've said something, or is there any real future there for us to share our prosperity?
I think the reasoning behind this is actually what you've said, and that is reducing the trade deficit.
Yeah.
But how are you going to reduce the trade deficit if the only trade that you've been doing is getting resources out of Africa? It means there must be something new you get out of Africa. And that is why President Ramaphosa, in his statement while he was handing over to the Senegalese president, he said, they're impressed that there is emphasis on funding projects that are going to enable imports. And that is value addition. And that is something very many African leaders have been talking about. We don't want to, just get aid and aid. We want trade. And again, Ramaphosa put it, it's Africa's kind of most meaningful partnership as for now. So we'll see how that happens.
I think so. I can personally see from the vantage point of African leaders. This is a country that's doing something totally different, from what they've seen in bilateral relationships, with North America and with Europe. But that said, why would the Chinese be interested in developing your exports, so to speak, so that they import your stuff? Why is that useful to them? Why should they be the ones to initiate that argument? Shouldn't that argument have been made very forcefully by African leaders to say, we want you to buy from us? Now, of course, accepting there's probably not much outside of natural resources and raw materials to be selling to the Chinese, but at least still make the argument that, hey, we want to not be overwhelmed with all your products that we may even say that you dump on us. And we want to be able to sell some things to you. But it's good that they say they want to buy from us. Buy what?
I mean,
they want to produce what to then buy from us.
I think the thing is, China is doing business. It's not really charity.
Yeah.
So if they put their money here, it's an investment. I mean, there's been talk of aid and stuff, but even that is really like free interest loans or concessional loans, and a bit of grants. But at the end of the day, it's doing business. It's going to put money where it's going to be able to recoup, even if it's long term.
Okay.
I mean, in 2016, the count of the contracts in Africa from China, those projects were, returning about $50 billion, and that is research from, the Chinese Africa Research Establishment. So that they're actually making money from this. That is the first thing. And then secondly, if you're dealing with the people, and that's Africa, who are telling you every now and then that we want to add value to our products. We just don't want to sell you gold that is not refined or oil that is not refined. Somewhere, somehow, someone is going to listen to them. If, the partners they have been working with for so many years have not been listening to them, have not been saying your projects or your refineries are commercially viable.
Okay, so then you talked about the Belden Road project. Of the Belden Road initiative of the Chinese, borrowed from their days of the Silk Road. So what is it? What does it mean to Africa? Because I know it's just a project they have for the whole world, for their whole idea of trading with the world and expanding their coast. But should we care what the Belden Road project is to Xi Jinping, to the Chinese? Does it matter to Africa?
It matters, and it's for the reason that Africa has been clamoring for a long time for markets.
Okay.
So if someone is offering a market, then you have to listen to them.
Okay.
And remember, China is one of the biggest markets in the world. In fact, the single biggest market in the world, and everyone has been clamoring to get in there.
Yeah.
Be it nations, be it companies, all sorts of everyone with something to sell. So Africa should definitely listen to them, and not just to sell produce there, but to also grow the trade in Africa or develop the trade routes in Africa.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about infrastructure, railways, ports, and other infrastructures that facilitate trade, like power.
Yeah. I
mean, Nigeria, for a case, has had power issues for a very long time and is still grappling with them. And currently there is this big power project that President Buhari has been trying to sell to China to fund, the Mambila project, which he equates to the Three Gorges project. So if we can get money for that in Africa, I mean, that would be awesome for the African government and for the African people to leapfrog into development.
To China, is Africa seen as one country? Or is it seen as regions? Or is it seen as 53, 54 countries? How are they looking when they're trading with Africa? Do they say, I'm trading with Africa as though it's one country? Or do they say, we're trading with Africa, doing investments in Africa as though it's regions? Like they have markets, regional markets? Or are they looking at individual African countries on a case-by-case basis?
I think
in that case, can they play one country against the other?